CEO of the ICA, the Interstitial Cystitis Association. We're the only nonprofit in the U.S. that supports the IC-BPS community, and I am also a patient. So it's very appropriate for me to be on this committee, and we did have global participation, which really excited us because one thing we really need to get to is a global consensus on what we're calling the disease, and then what treatments we're going to do and what outcomes that we are going to look for. So we were in charge of looking at patient-related outcomes and the outcome measures. So our goal was to address the use of outcome measures in the management of patients with IC-BPS in clinical research and also in general urology practice. So what we did was we first looked at a summary of the current related outcomes and outcome measures. We looked at the description, the references, the validation of all of those. Then we agreed on 4 critical areas of concern. We created 4 modified PICO questions, and then we had consensus recommendations. So our priority areas of concern are that we need the patient-related outcomes for both clinical trials and for clinical practice. We need primary outcomes for clinical trials, secondary and tertiary outcome measures for research, and then the best IC-BPS questionnaires for identifying and following patients in a general practice. So these are our modified PICO questions. I'm not going to read them all out to you. They are present in our manuscript. But basically what we looked at was our population is our patients with IC-BPS. Our intervention is the clinical trial or clinical practice. Our comparison is comparing them with other outcomes, and our outcome is the appropriate pro and prom. So these are all the different pros and proms that currently exist that we look through. So you can see there's quite a lengthy list here, and in our manuscript we do have all of the references and validation for each of these items. What we did as a group, once we reviewed all of those, is we came up with 12 recommendations. So these are not a guideline, but rather they are consensus recommendations. And we broke them up into strong recommendations and conditional recommendations. So a strong would be the vast majority of experts would agree. And for conditional, a majority would agree, but you're still going to have a strong minority of people who might choose a different option. So our first was the patient-related outcomes. And this is one of the most important ones really that we identified, and it is that the research community should commit to developing a true patient-related outcome. And by doing that, they need to look at employing unbiased, patient-oriented qualitative research. Because if it's a patient-related outcome, we need to be going to the patients to determine what they consider to be a successful outcome and not what a physician or a researcher wants to be a specific outcome. For our primary endpoint outcomes, we said that a numerical rating scale or visual analog should be strongly considered as a primary outcome endpoint in clinical trials. Voiding diaries for a minimum of 3 days at each time point should be strongly considered as a primary outcome in clinical trials. And composite primary endpoint should be considered, and a 7-point GRA should be considered as either a co-primary or one of the most important major secondary endpoints. Our third was secondary IC-BPS specific measures for research, and these are the composite instruments. So we said that the O'Leary-Sant can be considered as an anchor questionnaire, and that way patients enrolled in clinical trials can be compared with other populations in historical clinical trials. And then the NIH Guppy can be considered as a secondary endpoint outcome. Our tertiary measures for research, generic instruments, clinical trials evaluating treatment outcomes should incorporate a quality of life, and we mentioned a couple here that are most commonly used. We also said that outcomes should consider a validated composite pain assessment outcome, and we mentioned that the MPQ and the BPI are the most commonly utilized. Also, the last 2 conditional are that sexual function and psychosocial parameters, all of these associated with IC-BPS, should be considered for evaluation as tertiary outcomes. Our very last PICO was questionnaires to manage ICBPS in the clinical practice. And we said that a validated clinical questionnaire for baseline and follow-up is recommended so that you can maintain that patient and their care and see any transition of outcomes over time. And the GUPPY and the PUF are the two that we decided would be currently the most appropriate for that. So in summary, as you can see, we do have a lot of measures and patient-related outcomes that can be used, but we don't have anything that was created as an unbiased document and scale that can be used directly related to what patients consider to be a successful outcome. So more research is required, and our ICBPS patients deserve to have that research done so that they can have that information ready for them, and it will assist them in their long-term treatment and care. Thank you.
So it's interesting, it was done for prostatitis, but never done for interstitial cystitis. And also at this point, I think we need to be cognizant that, in terms of outcome measures, you need to separate urinary and pain if it's an outcome measure, but for diagnostic measure, it could be something else. So
we definitely talked about that pain and bladder issues should be separated because of the different phenotypes. You never know, they could be entirely different. Thank you.
All right, so